monsters coming down the hall. Spiders cover all the walls. Serial killer is on the line. Wants to know if you have the time. Aliens are landing soon. This will mean certain doom. Jigsaw spiders and cones alive. Blood and death are close behind. One thing you can be certain of, the zombies just can't get enough. Just one more bite is all they want. The ghosts downstairs are on the hunt. The Shade Chronicles are keeping score. That's what all the writing's for. They record the stories one by one so you don't miss all the fun.
Welcome to the Shade Chronicles, an anthology-style podcast featuring short works of fiction and serial prose, specifically with a sci-fi and horror flavor. Your hosts for the podcast are Derek Leftridge and Lawrence Trokey.
Hi, this is Derek Leftridge.
Hi, this is Lawrence Trokey, and thank you for spending your time with us. Let's get started with our first story.
The Shade Chronicles are keeping score. That's what all the writing's for. They record the stories one by one so you don't miss all the fun.
Previously on the Shade Chronicles.
Kathy was adopted and had a great life growing up. There were a couple of times she tried to contact her real mother, but those attempts did not produce much. In the package were three things, which were a letter to Kathy from her real mother, an old skeleton key, and an old wedding ring. The letter, written in what she assumes is her mother's handwriting, has detailed what she needs to do. Kathy is to take the key and ring to the Last Bazaar antique shop on Lincoln Street in the town of Asdale, which is located 55 miles from her home. Inside the store, Kathy sees multiple rows of shelves from floor to roof, and they are all crammed from the bottom shelf to the top with various antiques. Startled, Kathy looks up at the shelves on the left of the aisle, and between an Egyptian artifact and a deck of playing cards with a ratty purple ribbon around them, there is a bluish-colored box that amazingly has her name on the tag that is attached to it. Your Last Bazaar, Part 2. With a little bit of a chill rising in her arms, Kathy cautiously walks to the counter with the box. The old woman behind the counter asks, "Do you have the key and ring with you, dear?" Kathy reaches into her coat pocket and places them on the counter to the right of the box. She then asks, "What is this all about, and how do you know my biological parents?" With a smile that brings out all of her wrinkles, the old woman begins, "Your parents met me right before she and your father went to the afterlife. They were both genetic scientists for the government, and along with an assistant, they were contracted to find cures for rare diseases. Unknown to their assistant, your parents were pursuing a certain cure very heavily because your mother, she had a rare disease, and no one knew this but your mother and father. The assistant thought it was just another project in the list of government contracts they had to work on, and did not realize extra work and hours were being used on this project by your parents." Kathy inquires, "Why were they so secretive to their partner about the cure? Did the disease kill my mother? And what is the key and ring for?" The old woman smiles softly, stands up a bit taller, and continues, "Those are all great questions, and I will explain one at a time. Once the cure was finalized, your mother and father left town and their assistant behind. The disease was starting to affect your mother more, and they decided they needed to go to a remote place to start administering the cure. It would be illegal to steal a little of the main ingredient for the cure. They wanted all of it for your mother." The woman continues, "Right or wrong, they made their decision and headed to a cabin they had in the country. Their assistant was very angry, and after nearly a year of looking, finally found where they were. He was financially broke, and his life was ruined after they left town all those years ago. Needless to say, he was very angry, and on this date in 1987, he killed them in their sleep in the cabin. Your father's mother, your grandmother, was the next closest relative, but she was too old to keep and raise you, so you were put up for adoption. The old woman pauses and grabs the ring and key. The old woman explains, "The key is to open the next antique store I will use to distribute the next gift. And the ring is for me to hold on to until it is time for me to meet my maker to trade in for my own final destination. It is my proof that I helped enough couples deliver their gift to a loved one." Then the old woman quickly unlatched her necklace from the back of her neck and slid on the ring Kathy brought in. Kathy, with a very confused look on her face, asks, "Let me understand this. A business partner killed my biological parents because they ran off with a cure for a rare disease that could save my mother's life." "Correct," the shopkeeper confirmed. "That is just crazy sounding," Kathy continues. "Was the killer ever caught?" "Not yet, but he is on his way here now." The old lady smiles again. "I understand this is very strange, but you need to understand that this is a very positive situation, and I believe you will understand this very soon," the older woman details. "As you noticed, this town looks out of place. That is because you have traveled back in time a little over 13 years to the exact day, but 1 hour after your parents murdered." Kathy rubs her eyes and begins, "This all sounds like a sick fairy tale. I do not believe any of this." The old woman quickly looks up at the clock behind and above her on the wall. "I will explain, but I only have a few minutes before I need to meet your parents' killer." "This cannot be real," Kathy says with a voice of frustration and fear. "I am sorry about all this mystery," the woman behind the counter begins. "You see, I am a final promise keeper. Your mother and father came to me before they went to the afterlife. You don't know this, but before everyone leaves this world, they are given a choice to leave someone they love something to remember them by, or if they are killed, then they can leave something for the killer. This may sound crazy, but it is true." "This has to be a joke, lady. You are crazy." Kathy is very angry and scared now. She puts her hand in her coat pocket and touches the gun Joseph gave her. The old lady begins to come around the counter and says, "The gun is no good here. You do not understand that you are in an in-between state. You're safe, and nothing will hurt you here, and nothing will hurt me. I understand all this is a shock and strange, but is a good thing. I'm sorry you must go now." The old lady begins to lead Kathy down the aisle towards the door. "Read the letter in the package," she says. "It will clear everything for you, dear." Clutching the box awkwardly, Kathy tries to pull away from the lady's grasp. The old lady has a sturdy grip and is successful in getting Kathy out of the door. Kathy stands on the sidewalk in front of the store, angry and in shock, and yells, "You are crazy. You have not explained anything to me. I want answers. I will call the police if you do not explain what is going on." Before Kathy can say another word, she is pushed back by a gust of wind from Miss Carvad closing the store's front door. Kathy looks down to get her balance and steps off the curb and juggles her package. After getting her footing again, she looks left and right down the street and to the town to see if anyone has seen this odd display, and notices everything has changed back to the present time. When she slowly turns to look at the store again, it is a pet store, not the antique store she entered a little while ago. Scared and confused, Kathy goes straight for her car and quickly pulls away to get out of this town and on her way home. Later that day, when Joseph, Kathy's husband, gets home, he sees Kathy sitting on the couch sobbing, and she immediately points to a lava lamp on the coffee table. It seems to be on, but there is no electrical cord plugged into the wall socket. Joseph grabs the card leaning against the base, sits down next to Kathy on the couch, and begins to read the card. The letter reads, "Kathy, the formula your mother and I developed helped cure her disease. During our research, we discovered the disease was rare and hereditary. The disease skips generations, so you are safe. However, if you are with child, or even will be, your child will need the cure. Our gift to you is the solution that will keep your child, our grandchild, alive and disease-free. Please use the formula on your child's first birthday. It is in the gift you picked up from Miss Carvad at the antique shop. Love forever, Mom and Dad." Lava begins to flow and takes the form of a man and a woman embracing and kissing inside the lava lamp. From outside where I am standing, I see Joseph and Kathy holding each other and staring at the gift I gave her and I really hope this gift from Kathy's parents doesn't scare them too much. It was only meant to be a reminder of love from her parents because they wanted to be remembered by their daughter and protect their future grandchild. So putting their cure in the lava solution of the lamp was a great way to do that. At least that was my thought, and Kathy's parents agreed. I am in the business of giving people choices before they are sent to the ever after. I design the gifts individuals send to their loved ones. It may not be a normal type of gift to some, but who can say what is normal? Oh, by the way, I go by Shade, and some may know of my grandfather, Towler. But if you do not, that can be discussed at another time. Just remember, when it is your turn to receive your gift, just walk right into my shop that will be just down the road. I may be an old woman or a young man, but I will not be around for long. Nice to see you soon.
Attention Shade Chronicle podcast listeners. The merchandise store is now open. You can find the merchandise store on the merchandise tab on the Shade Chronicles website, which is at theshadechronicles.com. Find premium t-shirts, hoodies, tank tops, travel mugs, ball caps, and more at the Shade Chronicles podcast merchandise store. We now resume your regular programming. Previously on the Shade Chronicles, the military jeep drove to the gate of the security entrance. The driver flashed an ID and submitted his face for a retinal scan before the heavily armed guard gave the jeep clearance to proceed through the gate. Inside the jeep, Ananya sat next to Dr. Clarke, while Lieutenant Mitchell, the female soldier traveling with Ananya for most of her trip, sat in the front passenger seat next to the driver. The jeep pulled up to another security checkpoint, but this time the driver parked the jeep and everyone got out. Ananya, this is as far as I'm allowed to go with you. From here you will continue this path for several meters in this direction, and then you will meet with the visitor. As she came closer, she felt a wave of static electricity pass over her, making her hair on her arms stand up and even lifting some of her hair on her head. Then it was gone. She hesitated to move again, but she knew Dr. Clarke would chastise her if she did not. The scenery changed instantly to that of her bedroom. She was sitting on her bed with no idea how she got there. She started to feel queasy and a bit lightheaded when her mother came into her room. "Ananya," she said in that way mothers call their children when they want their attention, sweetly but with an undertone of authority. "Are you awake, child?" The Visitor by Lawrence Trokey, Part 4. Dr. Clarke was looking down at a computer tablet featuring the latest data on Ananya's vitals when every screen in the command center went dark. He looked up to the main monitor, which was a large LED-style screen at the front of the command center. He said out loud to no one in particular, but expecting someone to answer him fast, "What happened?" A technician in the center of the room responded, "Unclear, sir. We don't know if it's a power outage or something else." "Find out now!" Dr. Clarke screamed at the technician, and everyone in the room jumped. They had not seen him angry like this before, and it was unsettling. 30 very long and uncomfortable seconds passed, and then the tech said urgently, "Sir, the power is up and it is not related to the outage. The real cause of the outage is unclear at this time." He swallowed hard, waiting for the tirade he expected due to his lack of information. "I want eyes on them now, goddammit!" Another tech opened a channel on the comm system and said, "We need a visual surveillance on the girl. Send a squad into the forest. Command override Alpha Omega 1. The code was to let the military personnel responding to the order know that they had permission to enter the forbidden area. which was previously delineated by the visitor to Dr. Clarke's team by some kind of invisible barrier that would not let any of them pass through. The tech looked back at a fuming Dr. Clarke and said as calmly as she could, "Sir, a squad has been dispatched to the meeting site. We should have a visual from their body cams in a second." Outside, 2 military Polaris-style ATVs took off for the edge of the forest. It was starting to get near sunset, so the ATVs had to use their headlamps as they entered the wooded area. They sped up the path to the meeting area and stopped just before it. The soldiers exited the ATVs and had weapons ready as they scanned the area for any signs of Ananya. Back in the control tent, the main monitor came back to life with images from each of the soldiers' body cams. The screen was divided into 4 sections, one for each camera. Each section had a name for the soldier printed along the bottom of the screen. "Patch me into their comms," Dr. Clarke ordered. "Yes, sir. Your channel is open," the tech stationed in the center of the room replied. "Sergeant Niles," Dr. Clarke said, addressing the soldier in command of the squad, "do you see any signs of the girl or the visitor?" "Negative. No signs of either one. We confirmed by GPS that we are at the location for the meeting. The barrier is gone. There isn't any evidence that she came here. No footprints or tracks of any kind." "Sweep the area. Get more eyes out there to look for her." Dr. Clarke was erupting again with his rage. Everything he had hoped for, everything he imagined possible was now in jeopardy. His own legacy would be ruined if he lost the visitor. He would level the forest to find them if that's what it took. 30 minutes later, the countryside was crawling with military personnel. Multiple helicopters buzzed overhead, while soldiers on foot and in ATVs crisscrossed the hills leading to the forest. Climbers were on the mountain range ahead as well, with headlamps sweeping this way and that, all in what seemed a vain attempt to locate Ananya and the visitor. In the commotion, Lieutenant Mitchell walked over to a quiet area near the back of the control center tent. She lit a cigarette and took a deep drag on it, exhaled, and then scanned the immediate area to see if anybody was nearby. Satisfied she was relatively alone, she reached into her lab coat and pulled from it a cell phone. At least that's what it would have appeared to be to any casual observer. She activated the phone and brought it up to her ear. "It appears they have escaped the human security perimeter. We will need to use enhanced tracking methods to pick up their location. Begin wide-spectrum scanning. Look for DNA matches to the girl first. She would be the easiest to find since we don't know if Cheno altered his biometrics to disguise himself from our scanners." Cheno was the name she used to identify the visitor. After an acknowledgement of her order, she put the phone away and finished her cigarette. It took Ananya about 3 days to make it back to her home in Kensington, UK. With the aid of the wrist device her father had given her, she assumed the likeness of several people in order for her to escape the security perimeter Dr. Clarke's group had established around the foothills of the Dolomite Mountains, and then made her way into a small town nearby where she assumed the likeness of a bicyclist and joined a group of middle-aged bikers who were taking a tour of the area. She rode the tour bus with the group to the lovely town of Vicina. There, she separated from the group and snuck into a small hotel where she was able to steal something to eat and find a place to sleep for the night. Before he left Ananya, her father had given her instructions on how to make it this far. From here, she would have to find transportation that would take her back home. The fastest way was by plane to get back home to her mother, but her father, being cautious, said it was better to take the railway to Paris. From Paris, she could make her way to the English Channel and find a ferry to take her to the mainland of England. Another night's stay at a small hostel in Dunkirk, France, and another stolen meal brought her to the ferry crossing over to Dover, UK. Security was getting increasingly more tight the closer she got to her home. Her father had said this was probable and that she would have to be quite careful and very clever as she got nearer to her home. He knew Dr. Clarke would do everything he could to find her, so she needed to be aware of this as she traveled. Never be without a disguise when you enter a public space. They will use security cameras to try to find you, and they are very good at it, so be on guard. I will try to join you along the way, but what I do next is very complex and may take some time," her father said very seriously. Then he softened and said, "Ananya, are you sure you can do this? Will you not be too afraid to be by yourself?" She thought about it for a moment, and in that time, she recalled everything that she had been through up to this point, and all the incredible things she had seen and learned. Maybe she still had not processed it all yet, but she knew deep down she wanted to help her mother, and that gave her the strength and the determination to do what had to be done. She merely answered with, "I'll be fine, Papa." He smiled, kissed her on top of her head, gave her a hug, and then stepped back from her. As he did, a spinning light appeared behind him that grew larger as he got near it. As he stepped back into the spinning circle of light, now at a diameter that allowed him to do so without bumping his head, presuming one could bump their head on a circle of light, he waved to her from inside the circle of light, and then the circle shrank to the point of disappearing. She feared she would never see him again, but she knew she had to get started with her mission. She slept on the ferry ride across the channel. Almost 2 hours passed as she laid across multiple seats in the cabin on the main deck. It was early in the afternoon when she got on the ferry, so it really wasn't too crowded for her to take up some extra space. After exiting the ferry, she looked for transportation to London. She found a bus line heading in that direction, and she snuck on board and disguised herself as an old woman. The trip to London by bus took almost 2.5 hours due to midday traffic, road construction, and the occasional car accident. At the bus station in London, Ananya slipped into a restroom stall and tried to figure out how to get home. It was only a few miles to go, but she couldn't take a taxi or an Uber since she didn't have any money or even a credit card. She could walk, but her sense of urgency to get home was increasing the closer she got. She wanted to make sure her mom was okay and to see if Dr. Clarke was going to be there waiting for her. She had seen a bicycle rack just outside the ferry station and decided she needed to steal one to help her get home. She felt bad about taking someone else's bike, but she rationalized that if the situation was reversed, surely they would understand. Using the device, she changed her appearance to that of a young man wearing athletic bicycling gear and then snuck out of the ladies' room. She found a bike on the rack that had not been chained and quickly pulled it from the rack and pedaled as fast as she could away from the station before anyone could notice. The trip took her about 20 minutes to get to her neighborhood. The bike was not in the best shape and was difficult to ride, which may explain why it was not secured. As she pulled onto her street, she scanned the area for any signs of Dr. Clarke's crew. She saw them immediately in front of the entrance to her home. At least 3 dark SUVs were parked along the curb on the street. She pedaled slowly past the cars on the tight side street and tried to look casual about it. She looked up at the windows on the 2nd and 3rd floors for any clue as to what was going on. Across the street from her home was a small park suited for the upscale residents to walk their small designer dogs. She spotted the bench she loved to go to and read in the afternoons, just past the door to her home, and decided to stop there and pretend the bicycle needed attending, which wasn't far from the truth. As she sat there pretending to look at the bike, a luxury sedan pulled up in front of the house, and Dr. Clarke got out. He walked briskly up the stairs to the front door and then paused. Ananya watched him, reach for the door handle, and then look back at her. She almost jumped, but kept her composure. His gaze lingered on her for a second as she cautiously watched him from under the bicycle helmet she wore. Then he turned away and went into her home. She breathed a sigh of relief when she realized he did not recognize her. She decided she had tempted fate long enough and got back on the bike and rode it deeper into the park. Once a safe distance away, she thought about what to do next. She had to get Dr. Clarke and his people out of her home so she could get inside and find her mother. But how? She needed a diversion of some kind to lure them away. Lacking any explosive devices like the kind they used in the movies for such tactics, she decided she would have to be the bait to lure them out. Just down the street was a coffee shop on a busy corner. There would definitely be traffic cameras all over the intersection. She would go there and stand on the corner and let them see she was back in town. Then, as they approached, she would change her appearance and slip away back to her home. It seemed like a solid plan, she thought. She rode the bicycle to the corner where the coffee shop was located. She placed the bike on a public bike rack and walked into the coffee shop. Inside, she went into the restroom and changed into her normal appearance. She went back outside and stood on the corner, out in the open, resisting the urge to wave her arms and scream, "Here I am, come and get me!" After several minutes of watching the traffic pass, she thought the plan wasn't working. Then she saw the SUVs coming down a side street. She thought she heard a helicopter overhead as well. To her right, flashing lights were approaching from a different direction. The plan worked after all, or at least this part of it did. She quickly went back inside to the coffee shop and into the restroom again. She changed her appearance to that of a middle-aged man with a cane and walked out of the shop, but not before grabbing a cup of coffee intended for someone named Harper, according to the name written on the side of the cup. Sorry, Harper, she thought. She had just walked away from the shop as the police and military personnel descended on it. A smile crossed her face as she walked down the street towards her home. She took a sip of the coffee, retched at its taste, and then threw the cup away in a nearby trash receptacle. She got to the front steps of her home without any issue. The SUVs were gone, and there was no sign of anyone still watching the place from outside. She touched the door handle and gave it a push. It was unlocked, so she went inside. She suppressed a desire to yell for her mother. She wasn't sure if Dr. Clarke left anyone behind to guard her mother while they were chasing her. Her suspicions were confirmed when she heard the voice of Lieutenant Mitchell speaking to her mother upstairs. At this point, Ananya changed her appearance to that of Dr. Clarke. Her plan was to order Lieutenant Mitchell to join the others in the pursuit. She was worried, though, if she could sound convincing enough for Lieutenant Mitchell to take the bait, but she knew she was running out of time and had to risk it. She climbed the staircase and saw her mother and stepfather sitting on the couch in the main living space with Lieutenant Mitchell standing over them. She cleared her throat and said in the most commanding voice she could muster, "Lieutenant Mitchell, why aren't you engaged in the pursuit of Ananya? You need to get out there and find that girl." Lieutenant Mitchell turned slowly to face Ananya. It was then Ananya saw the pistol in her hand. Lieutenant Mitchell smiled at her, which she thought was odd. Lieutenant Mitchell seemed to always be at the ready to follow Dr. Clarke's orders. Why did she not comply now? "You are quite resourceful, young one, but your deception does not fool me. Now sit on the couch next to your parents." Lieutenant Mitchell now giving her own orders. Ananya was stunned. How did she know? She thought she'd try again. "Now see here, Lieutenant Mitchell." That was all she managed to get out before she was cut off. "Ananya, get on the couch or I will kill your mother," Lieutenant Mitchell said coldly. Ananya changed her appearance back to herself, and when she did, her mother and stepfather gasped. Her mother began to cry, and her stepfather tried to console her. She sat between them on the couch, and they both latched onto her, grateful she was there and not harmed. Ananya stared back at Lieutenant Mitchell, and then she realized what was going on. "You're not Lieutenant Mitchell, are you? You're an alien like my father." "You are quite clever as well, I see, Ananya," was Lieutenant Mitchell's only reply. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out the cell phone device. She began talking to someone in a strange language they did not understand. While she was on the phone, Ananya's stepfather leaned in close to her and her mother. He whispered, "We need to get out of here. I will overpower her, and when I do, you both need to run. Go out to the street and try to get the soldiers' attention." Ananya's mother placed her hand on his arm. "Reggie, please don't. I'm so scared. I don't want you to get hurt." She pleaded with him not to go through with it. "We have no choice. She plans to kill us all." His mind was made up. He kissed them both and leaned forward, ready to make his move. Lieutenant Mitchell was quite engrossed in the conversation, and her attention finally slipped. She had turned her back on them when Reginald leapt from the couch and tackled her hard. Both Ananya and her mom sprang up and started for the stairs. Unfortunately for Reginald, Lieutenant Mitchell was much stronger than she appeared and threw him off her almost immediately. She stood up and shot him in the chest. Ananya and her mother were shocked at the sight of it. "Get back on the couch now!" Lieutenant Mitchell ordered, waving the gun at them. Ananya's mother instead ran to Reginald on the floor. Blood was pooling on his chest at an alarming rate. She leaned down to him and started to cry again as she watched the life in his eyes fade away. She hugged him tightly, desperately trying to squeeze life back into him. "I said get back on the couch," Lieutenant Mitchell ordered Ananya's mother, pointing the gun at her head. Ananya, fearing her mother would be the next victim, jumped on Lieutenant Mitchell's back, trying to knock the gun from her hand. Again, almost with no effort, Lieutenant Mitchell flung Ananya onto the couch several feet away across the room. She reached for her mother to do the same, failing to notice a small circle of light forming behind her. It grew quickly as Lieutenant Mitchell was about to get a handful of her mother's shirt. When Lieutenant Mitchell realized what was happening behind her, she spun and tried to fire her weapon. Just as she did, Ananya's father stepped through the circle of light, raised a weapon of some alien origin, and fired it at Lieutenant Mitchell. Lieutenant Mitchell's bullet missed, but Ananya's father's weapon did not. Lieutenant Mitchell dematerialized in front of them, and the ashes from her remains drifted to the floor. Ananya sprang up from the couch and hugged her father. Her mother, still kneeling over her dead husband, brought blood-covered hands to her face in awe and wonder at the sight of him. "Are you all right, Maya?" he asked in a soft voice. Just hearing him say her name again sent shockwaves through her body. "Kamal? How is this possible?" She hadn't spoken his name in years either. She could barely get the words out. "There is much to discuss, yes. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. We must leave this place to be safe." Ananya's father was still holding on to her as he spoke to her mother. Maya looked quite unsteady. She was almost shaking as she slowly turned away from Kamal and looked at Reginald lying on the floor in a pool of blood. She gently placed a hand on his cheek. "He was a good man, Maya. He loved you both very much, and he proved it by sacrificing himself for you." He gently moved Ananya to his side and approached Maya. He knelt beside her and placed a hand on her shoulder. Maya looked at Reginald's still face. "Can you not bring him back like you did yourself?" she said wistfully, tears rolling down her face. "No, Maya, I cannot. I was not the one who brought me back from death. The ones hunting me now are responsible for my resurrection." He tried to explain, but he knew the pain she felt deafened her to the reasons why things were the way they were. Still, he had to keep trying to get her to see the truth. Time was running out. If we do not leave now, his sacrifice will be in vain. The people chasing Ananya will be back any moment. My enemies will find me too if we stay here much longer. I have the means to escape them all, and I have found a place of such peace and beauty where we can live together again as we once did as a family. He turned back to Ananya and said, "This is the task that delayed my return to you, but you seem to have done well enough on your own." He smiled, beaming with pride at his daughter. Then he returned to the subject at hand. "But we must leave now or we will never make it there. I understand this is difficult for you, but you must decide what you will do right now." Maya looked at Ananya's face. Her own face was a mask of pain and bewilderment. She looked at Kamal and then back to Ananya. Then she slowly started to rise. Kamal helped to steady her as she did. Ananya came to her as well and embraced her. She turned to Kamal as she stroked Ananya's hair. "Let's go," is all she said. Kamal smiled at her and then turned away. He raised another alien type of device and the spinning light returned. When it grew large enough, the three walked into it together. At that moment, Dr. Clarke slammed open the door to the home. He quickly scanned the first level and then ran for the stairs. Even at this age, he could move rather quickly if properly motivated. He lunged up the stairs while the soldiers and technicians poured into the entrance behind him. He made it to the top of the stairs breathless, where he watched the spinning circle of light slowly close, taking Ananya and her family far, far away. Well, we are back from our long summer break, and quite a break it was. Did you have a good time?
I had a good time. How about you?
Yeah. I had some time off, did some fun stuff with the family, all that kind of stuff. But the podcast was always kind of floating around in the back of the mind and coming up with new ideas, new stories for the new season. So, but we had to take care of some old business. We had to take care of finishing off some stories that we left everybody on cliffhangers on over the break. And the first one was The Last Bazaar, Part 2,
Right.
where is Kathy, correct?
Yes.
Yes. Kathy finally got to talk to the person at the store, get a little bit more information about what was going on. She'd learned a lot about her parents and
Correct.
what happened with them. And so I'm going to throw it to you, Derek, to kind of flesh that out and give us a little bit more insight into what was happening in part 2.
Okay, I'm going to recap the first part really quick. Kathy ends up getting something that tells her to go to a certain place so she can retrieve a gift, and it ends up being from her biological parents, and they are passed. She's been adopted, and she finds out what happened to them, basically, through being at the store. She also gets a gift at the store. Then, pretty sure the second part here, we are talking about how she's being taken out of the store because this is kind of a time warp type of deal to where she went back in time to pretty close to the time when her parents were killed to get the gift, and then she was taken out of the store because... Go ahead.
That would explain the older music, the older cars, everything that she's experiencing as she's driving up to the store and kind of wondering, why does this place seem like it's stuck in
Out of time.
past?
Correct. You're right. Thanks for reminding me of that. That is what it was kind of going back in time because the person that killed her parents, the person that was with them doing the scientific things, he is going to come to that store. We don't know what happens after that, and we may find out someday, but it won't be today. But she leaves, realizes the town has changed, and starts heading back home. Learns a lot about what happened with her parents and that there is something in the lava lamp that is going to help her future child.
Yeah, because the big reveal was that there was a disease that her parents were working on with this partner.
Right.
And that this disease was something that her own mother, I believe, was experiencing or dealing with, and it was going to be something that was life-threatening or earth-shattering, that kind of thing.
Right, yeah. It skips a generation, so Kathy didn't have to worry about it, but if she had a kid, which we know she was pregnant when we from the first part, she was with child, so she's going to have to use that for her child. But it was just a weird, creepy situation that I've had this story on my mind for many, many years, and how to kind of put it into a lava lamp, and then the explanation of how the lava lamp is like two people embracing.
Yeah. So why a lava lamp? I gotta ask
because it's an old story. No, I just thought. The whole thing was I think, and we're kind of getting into that. If you listen to some of our stories, we're kind of using this antique store type of thing as a premise for some of the things to lead to other story topics.
Yeah.
And that was my main thought when I first wrote the story many, many years ago, or had the thought for it. And I thought a lava lamp would be, one, kind of cool because it's old, and second, creepy because the lava turns into two people embracing, and that's the stuff that this girl gets from her parents that passed away that she now has to administer to her child.
Right.
So that was the main
But that's not all.
No.
We are introduced to somebody at the end of this story.
Yes, we are. Something that you'll hear more and more about, but it is a character named Shade, and that is what sort of we're kind of bringing together the whole Shade Chronicles is about. Shade kind of being involved because Shade was the old woman character at the antique store. Shade also has a relative that's mentioned that, again, may come up later in stories that we have, Taller. Taller is an old character that Lawrence and I remember because it was a character that my father wrote stories about, and it was kind of a storyteller type of person. And Shade may or may not have a connection to Taller, but Shade is involved with the store and giving the gifts to people before they move to the next part of their lives.
So just to take a minute to step outside of the storyline that you're explaining and all that. So Derek and I obviously have known each other for a long time, and we've always been interested in writing stories and doing artwork and all that kind of stuff. And then we come to a point where, Derek obviously knew this, but this was kind of a revelation for me. Derek's father was someone who appreciated creative writing and really wanted to be a writer himself in a lot of ways, and certainly pursued writing as a pastime for many years.
Right.
And I know I personally appreciated getting to know him and talking to him about writing and doing the creative process. Certainly, you must have had those conversations with him as well.
Right.
But towards the culmination of his efforts, he wanted to produce a zine, basically.
Right.
And this would be a bunch of short stories. Sound familiar?
Right.
And it would be horror and sci-fi related. And this would be something that he would publish and hopefully get a local following or a following of some sort. And so Taller was his narrator or
Correct.
his guide to his universe that he created. This creature called Taller,
Right.
which I believe you even illustrated, correct?
I did illustrate some of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And like I said, Taller was the he did 3 to 4 magazines on his own, did everything on his own. He was kind of popular in the independent scene for just a little while, not really long, because it does get to be costly to do that type of stuff.
Sure.
But it was called Taller's Tales, and it was really interesting, just the whole premise.
By any chance, do you have any of those Taller magazines still laying around?
I think I might, and I might. I thought I brought some over to show you. I'll have to look it up. I think I do have a few.
I remember seeing them back in the day.
Yeah.
And it's possible I might have one laying around somewhere. But yeah,
Okay.
dig those things up again and take a look at it. Because it was such a cool idea. I mean, it blew my mind,
Yeah.
as a 18, 19-year-old kid, that somebody was publishing something on their own and putting their own stuff into it. And all
Yeah.
that. So it was really cool.
It was cool.
Anyway, that was Last Bazaar Part 2, which wraps up that particular story.
Correct.
Very good.
And then our other story was another wrap-up, which is the final one of The Visitor. And I just want to say that the end of this one was one heck of a ride, a good fun ride. There was a lot of detail that helped me visualize the journey of Anya in this last episode, kind of going through different things. And obviously, we've talked about a month ago or 2 months ago our audio type of stuff, and that stuff is still kicking butt really well, I feel, in a sense of helping the story go along. So, yeah, basically a fairly intense ending. I like how Dad comes to the rescue. A nice complete ending. It was a really good story. Really good story.
Appreciate that. In a lot of ways, I think, even though you're very generous in your compliments, there's a lot of expected things, I think, happen in this. But the way that they unfold, at least maybe the voice that I give to them, I hope is unique enough that it's entertaining and maybe gives somebody a little bit different insight into how a story like this would wrap itself up. But I knew I wanted to have Ananya and her family reunited, and we had the problem of trying to get her mother released or removed from the people Dr. Clarke had watching her, guarding her, that kind of thing.
Right.
And then we knew that Dr. Clarke wasn't going to stop. He was an intense guy, and this was the project or the work of his life, really.
Right.
If he could establish communication between his civilization and another alien race, this would define him for generations to come. He would make it into the history books and be, that kind of person. So it was very important to him not to screw this up.
Yeah.
Which eventually it kind of all went sideways on him, and he got very agitated.
Yes.
In the story. Then to bring, some bit of tension in there, I thought, hey, we got to have somebody who's hunting the father. Somebody from this alien side of things. I don't give you a whole lot of detail about who they are, where they came from, what their purpose is, but I think it was just enough to say that they were after the father. The father had done something, had broke some rules, had done some things he shouldn't have done, and it was all because he wanted to be reunited with his family, which is a reasonable expectation for him, but still, these aliens didn't appreciate that, he was doing all these things, and so they came after him, and that part, taking the form of Lieutenant Mitchell,
Right.
who had been along for the ride this whole time, I thought just made a lot of sense and helped add that extra drama at the end.
Yeah, for me, it was a way to make it urgent. The urgency of the story, the urgency to kind of, get you to the point of how this is going to go this way or that way. Getting the feeling of the father and the daughter closeness, and actually the mother, even though she was parts here and there. It was something that was a really good way to bring it together and give you the feeling that, you want a happy ending with this story. And I like how they all together went into the sunset of another world.
Yeah. I mean, poor Reginald, he gets
Yeah.
shot. But I wanted him to have a hero's death.
Yeah.
So he died protecting his family.
Yeah.
And I think that's an honorable thing, even though he didn't get a lot of screen time, as they say.
Don't worry, he'll be telling this story a lot at Walmart as he's greeting people. He's fine. He's fine.
Sure. So, anyway, that's kind of the inspiration and kind of thoughts behind those two ideas. So that wraps up the episode, which is episode 11, coming back from the summer break. And we've got more great stories coming for the rest of the year.
Yes, we do.
A couple of multi-parters.
Yes.
That kind of thing. So I think there's a joint project on the books.
Yes, there is. There is.
You and I will be collaborating on that.
Yes, we will.
But other than that, any other thoughts before we send this
No.
the preview?
It's great to be back. I do like the idea of splitting up the season at this point in time. It was nice to have a little bit of a break, but then also nice to get back to it. So again, this is the first episode of the second part of season 2, and we're off and running.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that said, we're going to turn it over to the preview for the next episode. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time. Next time on the Shade Chronicles. Perhaps you would be interested in this. Margie and Janet walked to the back of the main aisle to find an old woman attending the counter. She was holding a book, a writing journal to be more specific, and offered it to the ladies for inspection. The old woman said it's a journal for someone who is a parser of the human spirit. And then she smiled. Sammy opened the package to reveal the journal. He was immediately enamored with it. Just then, for some reason, Sammy stopped staring at the couple to look at his backpack seated on the chair next to him. He had the urge to take out the journal he brought with him. He removed it from the backpack and set it on the table in front of him. He opened it to glance at the blank pages, and as they flipped past him, a desire to write something in the journal came over him. A thought was forming in his mind, pushing out all other thoughts and concerns, and it compelled him to write it down.
Cale is tired of being stressed out and not sleeping well because of this thing in the dark that he can smell before it starts to chase him. For the last 4 to 5 weeks, he has avoided the monster thing that wakes him up because of the repugnant smell by hiding in places all over the large modern-style home he lives at with his parents and brother Colt. Now all the places he has hidden in are no longer a secret to the monster thing, so Cale has to find new places to hide away from the monster. Cale cautiously and quickly sneaks down the hall, past his brother's room, and to the part of the wall where the secret hidden dumbwaiter is so he can hide in it. What feels like minutes, but is only seconds of this falling ride, the dumbwaiter stops abruptly, causing Cale's body to quickly fall to the floor of the dumbwaiter. The floor breaks away, and Cale falls again out of the dumbwaiter into free air and lands softly on a large bale of hay and rolls off onto his back on the ground. Cale gets up to his feet and looks around. From outside and out of sight, Cale can hear the thunder of many horse hooves begin to fill the air, and the ground slowly begins to rumble. Then multiple gunshots can be heard. Cale, startled, begins to slowly shuffle over the dry dirt of the stable floor towards the entrance. Before he can make it there, from the left side he is tackled into another stable pile with hay.
Thanks again for listening to the Shade Chronicles. For comments or inquiries, you can contact us at shadechron@gmail.com. That's SHADECHRON@gmail.com. Visit us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can also get more information at theshadechronicles.com. The Shade Chronicles podcast is the creative property of Derek Leftridge and Lawrence Trokey. Stories in this podcast were the sole creation of Derek Leftridge and Lawrence Trokey, respectively. Any attempt to replay for broadcast or distribution portions of any episode of the Shade Chronicles without the prior written consent from the creators and/or significant compensation is strictly prohibited. Shame on you for even thinking about it in the first place. Thanks again for listening. Tune in next time for another episode of the Shade Chronicles.